Alright, the next element of Bird's playing that I want to examine is the way he would play similar arpeggio figures as both triplets and sixteenths. So let's compare two interpretations of a figure. One way to play would be like this, 3, 4, 1. A second way to play would be this, 3, 4, 1. Now, this might seem like a negligible difference, but it's kind of big for a couple reasons. The most obvious is that it creates rhythmic interest, right? So if playing all eighth notes is boring, throwing in triplets is more interesting. More interesting still is throwing in sixteenths as well. Secondly, this changes the contour of the line because you're moving through the arpeggio more quickly. The second one resolves an eighth note earlier than the first one. So this actually does a lot more for the shape of your lines than you might think. Now, the second part of this idea is how it applies to turns. The best way to describe a turn is the quick toggle between two notes. So think of the very first phrase in Donna Lee. That would be a turn. You can play that figure as triplets with each note having equal value. However, you could also play it like this as an eighth and 2 sixteenths. There's also kind of a whole world of like in between where you're not quite all the way to sixteenths, but you're not triplets either. So this also applies to the arpeggio stuff from above. Bird would often play an arpeggio figure such that on first listen at full speed, it sounds like triplets, 3, 4, 1. But if we slow it down, we can hear that a note is held to the point where it sounds closer to an eighth and 2 sixteenths, like so, 3, 4, 1. Now, full disclosure, I don't actually think that Bird thought about it this cerebrally. I think he was generally just playing triplets and he would lay back to get this sound, but I'm just speculating. Either way, it's important to understand how much variation there can be in something so small. And it's okay to have preferences. You might favor one sound over the other. You might favor playing things more triplety or more sixteenthy, whatever. However, I think it's worth exploring these different options. I find that most players need to add triplets and turns in general. Like, their playing's too eighth notey, so adding any interpretation of turns would do wonders. But if you can incorporate different executions, man, you'll be on your way. So the advice I would give for this section is to slow these recordings down and really assess the time. Don't just say, sounds like a triplet at full speed, so it must be a triplet, because that's part of the brilliance. As I mentioned above, a lot of times you slow this stuff down and say, oh wow, I thought it was X, but it's actually Y. Now, sometimes you'll think it's X and it actually is X, but don't just assume, get in there and find out, because that adds to your understanding of style. So finally, I have an honorable mention here. I also want to point out the 16th note triplet figure. So this is a little bit different in that it requires you to add an extra note. So let's say we have a simple line, like, that would be a triplet turn. A 16th turn would be this. 16th note triplets would be this. So all three in succession would be... So it's an honorable mention because it's not really the same thing, but it is another way to add interest in the same realm. So, all right, in the next video, we're going to see how Bird put this stuff to use. So see you there.